such thing. And another thing too, there were a lot of people on both the extreme right and extreme left in the 80s that were talking about a strategy of tension, which means you try to make conditions severe enough so that the people will rise up. Well, guess what? If the conditions get severe enough, 90% of the people will say, I want to find out who did that, and I want to clamp them away in jail forever. They will always prefer safety and security over keeping their freedoms. And so trying to win the public's approval for a strategy of tension is absurdity. It's just, it never works.
So Lauren, could you draw a parallel then to the Dark Ages, let's say, when people were basically serfs, and the idea of being able to assault a castle or to ever have enough personal armament to take on a knight was absurd. So is that something to parallel to what we have now then?
Absolutely, and I think even more than that, I think that we are in a late Roman situation, and what's going to be real interesting is as the empires fall, what are the barbarian tribes going to look like to take its place? Because Rome was boring. The interesting stuff was all these people you're not supposed to learn about, like the Visigoths and the Alans and the Sueves and all that. They were really interesting, cool people. Yeah, they really were barbarians, and they trapped in the street. Most of them were illiterate, but they were really interesting. And it's interesting to think, as the real empires fall, what are going to be the new barbarians and what are going to be the feudal landlord relationships? I think it's going to be fascinating. I should look somewhere.
So you've probably heard about food camp, which was tried in the Patriot Act, and I've been hearing there quite a few completed. About one new and then quite a few small ones. And then you have, that, and then you hear about that they're actually starting to hire a lot of people for entrapment work. That's Halliburton. I've seen some stuff on that. And then you look at this NDAA, and you gotta wonder, what's the office? How much U.S. citizens can do that?
The best response to all that is just maximum publicity, because Ollie North, before he was famous for Iran-Contra, he was working at FEMA and building all these camps in like 82, 83, 84. And it was all the heavy publicity about that said, no, you can't do this anymore. And, you could take the benign possibility that most of the detention people are going to eventually be shipped overseas to these extradition camps that don't exist, and all this kind of stuff. But they also might be domestic. And the best way to prevent that is through maximum publicity and raising the temperature of being able to implement anything like that. And for example, with the NDAA stuff, I think 90% of the people in the military, both the soldiers on the ground, even the generals, don't want to do this stuff. They said, no, that's not our job. We don't want to do that stuff. And so I think there's going to be a lot of civilian people at FEMA that say, we do hurricanes, we don't do concentration camps. But, Joe.
I think we all might have heard of I'm trying to remember the name of the actual experiment, but it took place, I think, in the 50s, where they would have people administering electric shocks.
Oh, yes.
Being told to, and they recently actually reran that experiment and found out that the number actually had gone up of people that are willing to inflict pain on other people because somebody in a position of authority says that it is acceptable to do so. So I do beg some caution of while an armed uprising is not practical. I do think that the idea of the resistance of gun ownership, though, is one of the things that has kept the so-called hounds at bay. Not saying that they need to be used proactively, but that there is a defense mechanism, because the last number checked was the fact that there are as many guns in the United States of America as there are citizens, just taxpayers. But on an NDAA note, there is an email that I received while we were here from, this is from the Green Dragon Tavern Group, and actually one of the gentlemen from Green Dragon Tavern is going to be actually giving the Thursday occupation educational event. But this here is about, I'll just go ahead and read the email. Angry about SB 1867 and the feds being able to detain you indefinitely? There is a solution, but we need your help. The El Paso County, Colorado Commissioners will be voting on precedent-setting policy to decide whether or not El Paso County, Colorado will oppose the federal government's SB 1867 unconstitutional presidential executive need your help by attending this meeting or promoting this policy in your county, state, and sheriff areas. Please distribute nationwide and share it for your county. In El Paso County, Colorado, County Commissioner Peggy Littleton is bravely championing a county policy that Freedom Action Coalition team presented for consideration and then was modified specifically for El Paso County, Colorado, as a solution to the overreaching arm of the federal government. If passed, the policy states the federal government does not have jurisdiction over the county, and the county may protect citizens from SB 1867, presidential executive orders, and other federal departments which have been acting as policing agents without rightful jurisdiction and under unconstitutional rulemaking authority. This county policy would override the federal government imposing unconstitutional policing from all federal departments. But we need your help to get it passed in El Paso County. Essentially, this is taking place this coming Thursday, December 15th, at the El Paso County Board of County Commissioners meeting at roughly 2:30, which is at the Acres Drive facility, which is at 3275 Acres Drive. Of course, I'll go ahead and forward this out and put this up on the Occupy website, but I know it's short notice, but
That's very cool. And keep in mind, never dismiss arch conservatives' willingness to support a lot of this kind of stuff. I talked to a Tea Party panel a couple weeks ago, and just had a great old time. And they had, shared a lot of concerns about civil liberties, and particularly the NDAA stuff. But of course, the county challenging that, it's kind of like Colorado has not yet experienced the crackdown on dispensaries that California has. And like the DEA or another federal agency, in the case of NDAA, could just come in and say, yeah, you think so, huh? Because DEA has raided all the California dispensaries now, and they really don't care. And there's certainly an argument that a federal agency could come in and say, you think so, huh?
Yeah.
But it's very positive to see they're thinking about it. God, it's great.
I was actually going to ask you about that because federal law trumps state law.
Yeah, exactly.
County law,
exactly.
right? So. That's
Well, there comes up. It's all a matter of raising the stakes and what are you going to play to, because there were all those southern situations during the civil rights movement where governors would try to call out alternative national guards on each other. It could happen that a state would say, we are not going to take federal rule about pot dispensaries or NDAA or whatever, and we're just going to bar the door. And if it came down to, National Guards called out at the state level versus some kind of, I guess the feds would back down, but I could be wrong. Who knows?
Well, that's all, because I remember there being townships or municipalities that had voted specifically not to observe the Patriot Act.
Right.
Was that ever challenged, and was there ever any precedent set with that?
That was kind of part and parcel of some of these challenges, like the library groups that did that, but it was kind of like it never got to the point where a town knew something was coming up and could do something about it. In fact, the thing that made me the saddest was, when you really look at the way cities crack down on political conventions or G20 or IMF meetings, and then on Occupy, you had as many liberal Democrats proposing laws like no wearing of bandanas in city limits and that kind of shit, no puppet factories because we don't want those terrorist puppets around, as you did conservative Republicans. And I think if you went city by city this fall with the Occupy crackdowns, I would say you'd had almost an even split of city governments, between the liberal Democrats and the conservative Republicans. So I don't know when a city would stick by its intent to go against the feds,
Well, have you ever heard of any actual cases of sheriffs confronting, for instance, federal agents? Like I read not too long ago about a sheriff that basically made a public statement regarding the Bureau of Land Management. Because what they were doing was essentially finding a justification to steal people's capital.
Yeah.
And saying that it basically was falling outside of their jurisdiction. And this actual sheriff went out and said, actually, you guys want to come steal cattle, I'm going to arrest you.
Yeah.
Saying that to basically the land agency.
Most of Nevada and Utah has been kind of like the Rangers won't go there anymore because of that reason. And then there's like, on the other side, there's like Santa Cruz and a few cities that have like kind of said, we will not allow the enforcement of XYZ laws around. what tends to happen is the federal government will try its hardest to avoid any direct confrontation, but then, like in the Randy Weaver case, when confrontation becomes impossible to avoid, they will come down as hard as possible with as many weapons as possible, just to show you do not challenge or expect anything.
Now, DOC, Colorado has one of the largest prison systems in the country, and I've often thought that the reason that Colorado makes what are essentially misdemeanors and felonies is to provide bodies for the system. So you have a lot of people that are basically quite harmless in DOC who could be released on a moment's notice without any great harm to civil peace, and replaced, let's say, with the leaders or potential leaders or suspected leaders of resistance to the USG.
Could happen, sure. And the thing to keep in mind too is,
By the way, I was convicted at something here. I got an attempted on what would have been anywhere else an assault.
Yeah, because
I mean, just a...
half the problem they have right now is, and this is like not unique to Colorado, but everywhere, this old idea of privatizing prisons has been, but it's been a massive failure because the private prisons keep getting busted for being, not up to, Federal Bureau of Prison Standards and all this kind of stuff. So it's like they have all these great ideas and they have nowhere to put people, and so I think they're finally re-looking at all these like 3 strikes type laws because they're saying we really can't imprison 20% of the population. We don't have the capability to do that. So I think somebody once said that the best bet against too much imperial nonsense of the federal government is just its budget crisis, and I think that's true of the prison industrial complex too. It's like sooner or later you just don't have any money that China doesn't already own in debt that you can do any of this shit.
What about the for-profit element of prisons, where they're using it for everything from like fish farming to textiles to
BBUs?
Yeah, it's a big problem with women.
So you have these,
Calvin
get people in
Klein.
there on weed charges. You have a shit ton of people. You basically make a call center out of it, and they say they're trying to sell credit cards.
The problem is that the privately run prisons have been so badly managed that a lot of the CEOs of some of these companies are now facing potential charges, which they'll probably get out of because the feds will, change it. It's like, but they don't have a very good reputation, that's for sure. So.
Laurie, you began this by talking about how this is a cycle. The imposition of kind of draconian laws is a cycle that repeats itself every 30 years or so. How do you see this how do you see coming out of this as a usual cycle thing, or is this something, an escalation towards a totalitarian regime that we haven't seen before, or that's irreversible?
I like to be optimistic, and I thought that we left the 50s not just because people were